I want to give a disclaimer before you watch this video. If you don't like boring, this video is not for you because this is all about boring. Boring holes, primarily, though you might find it boring in other ways too. But for a woodworker, one of the difficult operations throughout time has been how to make a round hole in a piece of wood. And if you trace back through the history of mankind, probably the first holes bored in wood were drilled by accident, maybe making a friction fire and someone realized that they could bore all the way through. If you add a little sand to the hole when you're doing a bow drill or a hand drill, it can actually bore a little faster. So that was maybe the first use of abrasives in woodworking. And then it was found that you could get a pebble very hot in a fire and drop it on a board and let that work its way through, right? So you're using heat or fire to bore a hole. But eventually a tool was developed for boring a hole, and that is the awl. So this is a bird cage awl. This is a very fancy one. But the awl was a really simple basic tool that was made of bone and then onto stone and then onto iron and or steel. But the tool is just for twisting and working your way through material. And so for things like snowshoes and canoes and all kinds of things, this was an essential tool. And this, for a very long time in many places in the world, was the primary boring tool. So I do want to get back to the awl because I think it's an awesome solution for a lot of things today, but I'll return to it. So in terms of actually making a tool to use, a kind of bit, like a bit design to use, the earliest bits were spoon bits. So these dated back to Roman times and maybe even a bit before. So it's just a round stock with a flute in it. It looks like a gouge. And this would be usually probably a cross handle or a T-handle head and then rotated. And it cuts actually quite a nice clean hole, maybe a little slower than we're used to with modern bits, but really that's not much of a problem for this bit. Spoon bits have a lot of advantages. You can adjust the angle of the hole as you're boring. Some chair makers utilize that because they can bore a hole that widens as it goes into like a chair seat. So you can do like a blind wedge or fox wedge inside the mortise that you're boring. Another advantage to these is that you can make them yourself, which I'll talk about again in a minute. But there are spoon bits, and then there are spoon bits. All right, so that looks like something you'd use in a garden to dig soil, but this is actually for boring wood. This is a clog maker's spoon bit. So imagine this with a big handle on it, and you use it like a gouge in combination with boring. So you'd drive it in, and you turn it, and you remove material, and you scoop with it, and you gouge with it, and you spin it, you rotate it. So these were all sharp cutting edges, and you'd have to have a good degree of skill to control this well. But wooden shoe makers, clog makers, use these all the time, and so they were fairly common for a long time. Nowadays, it's pretty hard to find these kinds of things. Of course, you could have a blacksmith or someone make one, but really interesting tool. That's about the larger end of the spoon bit spectrum, I would say. So then as the tool became, basically all these things have the drill bit as the tool. And then at some point the bit became replaceable or interchangeable. So you have the T-handled auger, which would have had a spoon type bit to it. Sometimes these were like gimlets that you'd be able to brace your chest against it to bore, to do really heavy boring. Sounds extremely uncomfortable, and it apparently was by many period descriptions of the process of boring all day. But at some point it was designed these braces that you could change out the bits. So this is a beautiful old wooden brace with the cast hardware. And so these were made to accept these tapered square shanks. So you could just put that in and do your boring. I don't want to bore on the bench top, but so basically this allows free rotation in either direction, and you brace your hand here, or you can brace it up against your chest to provide the boring power, because spoon bits require you to apply the force to get it through the board, right? And so spoon bits also do cut a very clean hole. This one we've never sharpened. I've actually never used it before. This is another example of the wooden brace. Joshua made this brace for an article he wrote on that very topic for issue 6. I would suggest going and checking that out, because he goes through the details of how to make this and also how to make your own bits. And so this one has replaceable bits. This is 1/4 inch spoon bit, and then you can just chuck it in there. And this one actually is sharp, so I'll give this a whirl. So obviously that's plenty quick, and it's great because you can just make your own interchangeable bits for this, and it's a great conversation piece if you have other woodworkers stop by. But so these would be very pre-industrial solutions, and then you move into the more industrial ones. These are factory made. So you have the Spofford brace here. So this is a split jaw chuck. Very, very simple. Like these are dead simple. These don't get broken, or they don't have gears to jam or anything like that. You basically just have the rotating head and literally a split jaw. The iron is split with a screw to squeeze. You put your tapered shank in, squeeze it down. That'll last you forever, right? And for any boring tasks and things like that, these things work great. Then they got fancier, right? So now you have the ratcheting mechanism. So the idea is that if you're boring in a corner and you can't make the whole sweep, you can ratchet back and forth. I've almost never found use for that, but I mean, I guess if you were in that situation, it would be good to have this mechanism. So this is a 2-jaw chuck. The 2-jaw chucks can accept the tapered square shanks. They can accept large round shanks, but that's about it. There's also a variety of a 3-jaw chuck that can do most any size of the round drill bits that we see today, as well as they can accept the tapered square ones and hexagonal shanks and things like that. But when you start using a brace, you start to realize that torque becomes an issue if you're doing really big holes. Like let's say you're boring for a staked bench, and you want to put an 1.5-inch auger bit on this. You're going to have a hard time. It's going to really work your arm, because basically you've just got one arm doing the torque. So one solution is to get a brace with a bigger sweep. So this brace has roughly a 14-inch sweep to it. That does give you more torque, but I would say if you're working a brace this big with a big bit, you're better off going with the T-handle. Now, like I was saying, a lot of the early tools for boring with the T-handle and the spoon bit or the gimlets, it was just a dedicated tool, one handle to one bit. So you'd have a stack of these, right? And these come in all varieties, all shapes and sizes. This one is pretty neat. It's obviously blacksmith made, and the shaft was split and then forged up through here, through this handle, so that you don't have any issues with potentially splitting the handle when you really put torque on it. You can see how that might be the case with this style of handle, where it's just a square shank coming through. Imagine if you really put some force on that, and you might end up splitting that handle. This one is holding quite well, even though the handle has a split in it. It is not, amazingly enough, it's not really an issue structurally, this is going to keep working really well. And this one's nice and sharp. But one of the things with these auger bits is that they have these self-feeding threads. So this was a big leap in technology, a big advantage over the spoon bit. Because like I said, the spoon bit, you have to apply the force to drive it through the board. So you're leaning on it or you're using your hip to drive it in. You have to apply that force. But with these self-feeding tips, this pulls itself through the hole. So as long as these threads are nice and clean, and as long as your auger bit is nice and sharp, it will pull itself through. And so you're basically just rotating and it will feed itself, and then you are just the supply of torque. You are not the supply of force to get through the hole. So, and then another variety of boring technology came about, and that is the egg beater drill. Now, people have a lot of opinions about these. Some people love them, some people hate them. I find myself kind of halfway through the spectrum. I've never really fallen in love with the egg beater drill, but they are handy. And if you are trying to get away from, having to tote around a charger and batteries and things like that, and if you just have some light-duty boring tasks to do, these things, they do work well. For the most part, you can track them down just about anywhere. Sometimes they take a little fiddling to get tuned back up. Like this one was quite worn, and we had to replace a few washers and stuff, basically just swap out some screws, and had to make a little backer plate for this because it was so worn it was wobbling. But, these things, they work quite well. And you have a couple handles on this one. Some of these come in 2 speeds, so they have a transmission. You can do a low speed and then a high speed. Another neat thing about them is that you can store your bits in the handle, right? So basically the tool, it's an all-in-one. You can put all the bits you need, throw it in your toolbox, never have to worry about charging batteries or finding an outlet again. So these are a good option. Like I said, I've never gone gaga over an egg beater drill, but they work just fine. So in terms of other interchangeable bits, we've all seen the spade bit, right? You get the 6-pack of these at the big box store, and they're basically disposable. These will bore a hole. They're specifically designed for a powered drill. They cut a rough hole usually. They have these little spurs for establishing the hole, and then they just bore right through. This is more like a tool for running rough wiring in your house. There are some higher end ones for woodworkers. And if you're gonna go for a spade bit, I'd go more in that direction than the big box store ones. These will not give a really nice hole. But there are some better ones out there. The precursor to the to the spade bit is the center bit. Now these are designed for hand power. So instead of having your two spurs, 2 cutting surfaces, this one has the center spur. This is a cutting surface, and then this is a scribing edge. So you can imagine this scribing a circle, and then this is just slicing that wood off. And so it really works well with arm power. You don't have to really dig into it to get a good cutting action. And these do cut a nice clean hole. And you can see how this would have evolved into this as tools became powered, because you can basically double up your cutting by adding a spur on both sides and another cutting edge on both. But the center bit also evolved into another style of bit, boring bit. Hope you're not all too bored with all this. This is fun stuff for me. So you have these 2 styles of bits. This one came first. This would be the Jennings twist auger bit. So this came about in, say, the mid 1800s, 1850 or so. So you have the self-feeding tip, and you have these 2 flutes, right? So you have cutting spurs and cutting edges, and then these flutes remove the waste from the hole. So the center bit had that disadvantage. It couldn't remove waste from a hole. So if you're going to any degree of depth, you have to stop and clean it out. Now this actually draws the waste out of the hole. So you can go pretty deep, sometimes finish your hole before you have any issues with chips or stuff clogging it. So this design came about and these things just took off, right? This was a revelation in boring technology. So another one came about around the 1880s, and this is the Erwin style. So instead of having double flutes all the way down, and you can see on this there's really no center shaft, it's just flutes. This one was able to maintain the center shaft because one of these twists just ends right here. So then you have the second one working its way around, and these are actually a little bit more efficient at removing waste because there's so much more room in here for it to come out. And they're also a little bit stronger because they keep that center shaft. But for the most part, I don't know, either of these twist augers work great, and you can oftentimes find, you know, just a set of them at a garage sale or something like that. Pretty much everybody's grandpa had a set of this in his workbench, and so they're easy to track down. And you have all kinds of options like the adjustable. This one can cut up to a 3-inch hole. But what you want to look for is you want nice clean cutting spurs. You want that self-feeding tip to be clean, and if it looks like it's gummed up, you can pick it out or use, I think Joshua uses dental floss actually to clean his up. But these things work great, and you can get them in sizes. This is 1/4 of an inch. You might even be able to go a little smaller than that. But a set of those is really great, and they work really well, especially with the brace. So then other styles of bit that we have going on here, we have like those center bits. If you can find them, like a pack of them, these were just all together in a box somewhere, they're great. In terms of things like countersinking, if you're going to bore for screws, there are options out there as well. Just like today, we have specialized countersinks that can go on twist bits, right? You can get something like this for a brace, which is essentially, it's like a countersink spoon with a tapered auger, right? And so these are pretty neat. That will bore and countersink all in one step. Or you can just get the regular old countersink, which requires you to change bits. You can bore the hole and then countersink for the head. But again, like there's so many different things out there. If you just start looking around, boxes and boxes of rusty tools, you can find some good stuff. And then of course, the last option, and one that every woodworker will have and should have, is just a set of twist bits. And these can work with a 2-jaw chuck or a 3-jaw chuck, or with the egg beater. But I did mention that Joshua made his own spoon bits, and this is the kind of thing you can make with just a rod of 01 steel stock and a grinder. And you know, you could hand crank grind this, or use stones, or use abrasives. And you basically are just creating a gouge that you can chuck in your brace, or in your drill, and your egg beater. And it's a very simple way of making yourself a set of really useful drill bits. So I would, again, suggest you check out Joshua's article in issue 6 if you want to know more about that. But returning full circle to the most basic of boring tools. So I have found myself really getting a lot more use out of the awl lately. And so the birdcage style awl is the one that has 4 flats. Instead of this being a round shaft, its flats are ground into it. And what those flats do is it really enables wood removal. It acts like 4 cutting edges. And so you can just bring this anywhere that you're going to need pilot holes. And this is a tool for marking. This is a tool for making pilot holes. If it's tapered, you can make different size pilot holes. And it really is extremely versatile. I think the awl is a really overlooked tool. So everybody should have one of these in their toolbox, especially if you're going somewhere to do a task. It's really versatile. It It really does it all, as you might say. So anyway, hope you didn't find this too boring. There are a lot of options out there for woodworkers who want to unplug and walk away from powered tools. And this is just kind of the tip of the iceberg, but hopefully a place to get you started.